Subscribe to keep this channel alive. On February 1st, 1908, a king was shot dead in broad daylight in the center of his own capital. His son used the assassination to seize emergency powers within 48 hours. 2 years later, the monarchy was gone. This is the story that English-language history buried. February 1st, 1908. A schoolteacher with a rifle killed a king in under 10 seconds. The monarchy survived him by exactly 973 days. The Terreiro do Passo, the grand riverside plaza at the heart of Lisbon, was busy that Saturday afternoon. King Carlos I was returning from a royal holiday. He sat in an open-top carriage with his wife, Queen Amélie, his eldest son, Crown Prince Luís Filipe, and his youngest son, 18-year-old Manuel. The route was familiar. The day was unremarkable. He never reached the palace. 2 assassins in the crowd opened fire. King Carlos I died in the carriage. Crown Prince Luís Filipe took a bullet to the jaw and died within minutes. Young Manuel was grazed in the arm and survived to become king before the day was over. 2 assassins, both killed on the spot. No trial. The Portuguese government announced the case was closed within hours. It wasn't. What happened in the 48 hours that followed and the 973 days after that is the story history chose not to tell. Portugal, 1906. To understand why a schoolteacher decided to kill a king on a Saturday afternoon, you have to understand what Portugal had become by 1908. The country was technically a constitutional monarchy. It had a parliament, a throne, and a legal framework built on the liberal model. In practice, the system had rotted from the inside. The 2 dominant parties, the Regenerators and the Progressives, had spent 30 years alternating in power in a cycle so predictable and so corrupt that the Portuguese gave it a name: rotativism. One party came in, distributed patronage jobs, depleted the treasury, fell. The other came in and did exactly the same, repeat indefinitely. King Carlos had watched this collapse for 16 years. He was cultured, artistically gifted, passionate about oceanography. He led several scientific expeditions and published serious marine biology research. He was not a stupid man. But he was a king who had decided that the parliamentary system was broken beyond repair. In 1906, he moved. He appointed João Franco as prime minister with a specific instruction: fix Portugal and do not let parliament stop you. Franco dissolved the legislature. He began governing by royal decree. He introduced financial reforms, improved some infrastructure, and ruled a constitutional country with no constitutional check on his power for nearly 2 years. The opposition called it a dictatorship. They were not wrong. And here is what the official account never dwells on. João Franco's reforms included reinstating taxes the parliament had voted to abolish. He was collecting money from the Portuguese people without any legal authority to do so. By 1908, even conservative royalists had begun to turn.
The Republican movement, which had been a fringe intellectual position for decades, suddenly had a mass grievance. And within the Republican movement, a secret society called the Carbonaria had been growing steadily through Portugal's cities. Its membership concentrated among teachers, clerks, and artisans who had watched rotativism and Franco's dictatorship consume any hope of legitimate reform. They had decided that reform was no longer possible. Manuel II, age 31, schoolteacher. He was not a professional killer. He had no criminal record. He taught gymnastics and Portuguese literature at a secondary school in Setúbal, roughly 30 miles south of Lisbon. He was also a competitive marksman. He had placed in regional shooting competitions. He knew exactly what he was doing when he raised the rifle. Alfredo Costa, age 32, commercial clerk. Costa had been involved in Republican political organizing for years. He was a committed Carbonaria member, more explicitly political than Buissa, less publicly prominent. He carried a carbine into the Terreiro do Passo and opened fire alongside Buissa on a coordinated signal. Both men were killed within seconds of firing their shots, by the royal guard, by bystanders, by the controlled chaos that follows a public assassination. Neither man lived to be arrested. What the official investigation then produced was a story of two isolated fanatics. The Carbonaria was mentioned but not prosecuted as an organization. 4 peripheral figures were eventually tried. The sentences were light. Most were free within 5 years. But there was a name that appeared in the initial investigation and then vanished from the record entirely. Luís de Almeida, the Carbonaria's supreme commander. He was detained after the assassination. He was released. No charges, no trial, no explanation in the official documents. His file was closed. What most historians who have studied the case acknowledge is that the Carbonaria's Central Committee almost certainly knew what Buissa and Costa planned. Whether they ordered it, sanctioned it, or simply did not stop it, that question was never formally answered, because the institution that might have answered it, the Portuguese state, became a republic 2 years later, and the republic had every reason to frame the assassination as spontaneous heroism rather than organized conspiracy. The clean story was more useful than the true one. Stories like this one don't get recommended by the algorithm. They survive on subscriptions. If you're not subscribed, do it now, and we keep making them. Manuel II, 18 years old, King of Portugal. He had a bullet graze on his arm. He had just watched his father and his brother die beside him in a public square in front of hundreds of people. He was, as of that afternoon, the legal sovereign of a country in constitutional crisis. What Manuel II, or more precisely the advisors who surrounded him, did in the next 48 hours has been almost entirely erased from the standard narrative. João Franco, the dictatorial prime minister, was dismissed and fled the country on the night of the assassination itself. He went first to Spain, then France. He never returned to Portugal and never faced any legal accountability for 2 years of extra-legal rule. The same men who had used the king's authority to bypass parliament now needed to be seen responding to popular outrage. Admiral Ferreira do Amaral was appointed caretaker prime minister. Parliament would be restored. The dictatorship was over. The monarchy had heard the people. This is the moment that the monarchy's defenders later pointed to as evidence of good faith. It is also the moment that destroyed them, because the one thing you cannot do after your king is shot dead in a public square is spend the next 2 years looking like you are managing the aftermath for political convenience. The Carbonaria's membership doubled in 1908 and 1909. Republican newspapers that Franco had suppressed came back to print, and the story they told? That the monarchy had driven men to desperation, that the blood in the Terreiro do Passo was the crown's responsibility, landed on ground that was already prepared to receive it. Manuel II was not a malicious king. By most accounts, he was a decent young man who had been preparing for a military career, not a throne. He had not created the conditions for the assassination, but he had inherited a system that had already spent its credibility, and he had neither the time nor the political capital to rebuild it. The assassination gave the Republicans the story they needed. The monarchy's response gave them the justification. October 5, 1910, Lisbon.
973 days after King Carlos I was shot dead in his carriage, a Republican revolution overthrew the Portuguese monarchy. Units of the army and navy sided with the Republicans. Fighting lasted less than 2 days. Manuel II boarded a royal yacht at Ericeira on the Atlantic coast and sailed for Gibraltar. He never came back. The First Portuguese Republic was proclaimed from the window of Lisbon's City Hall on October 5, 1910. 112 years of constitutional monarchy ended under 48 hours of urban combat. Now let us account for every piece. João Buissa and Alfredo Costa, killed at the Terreiro do Passo on February 1, 1908, killed at the Terreiro do Passo. Initially buried without ceremony, after the Republic was established, they were reinterred as national heroes. Their portraits appeared on Portuguese banknotes. Schools were named after them. The men the monarchy had called murderers became the Republic's founding martyrs. João Franco, the prime minister whose 2-year dictatorship had fractured the monarchy, lived in exile in Spain and France. He published his memoirs defending his governance. He died in Madrid in 1929. No charges, no accountability. Manuel II, the last king of Portugal, spent the remaining 22 years of his life in exile in England. He settled in Twickenham. He collected rare books, supported Portuguese cultural institutions from abroad, and died in 1932 at the age of 42, with no legitimate heir. The House of Bragança's male line ended with him. The Terreiro do Passo, the plaza where the shots were fired, still stands in central Lisbon. Tourists cross it daily on their way to the river ferries. The spot where King Carlos I was killed is marked by a small bronze plaque set into the pavement. Most people walk over it without looking down. The monarchy used its king's assassination to justify emergency action, dismissed the dictator, restored parliament, and presented the crisis as proof that the crown was listening to its people. It destroyed them anyway. The Republican movement that João Franco's dictatorship had radicalized did not go home when Franco was dismissed. It had a narrative now. It had 2 dead men in the Terreiro do Passo and a throne that produced them. It did not need anything else.
King Carlos I, shot dead in under 10 seconds in a public square. Crown Prince Luís Filipe died 20 minutes later in the same carriage. The Portuguese monarchy ended 973 days after the shots were fired. The 2 men who fired those shots were buried as national heroes by the government their bullets helped create. And the question of who gave the order, the question the Portuguese state refused to answer in 1908 and the Portuguese Republic refused to ask in 1910, was never resolved. The file that might have answered it was closed in 1910 and has never been fully reopened. The carriage that carried King Carlos I and Crown Prince Luís Filipe through the Terreiro do Passo on the afternoon of February 1, 1908, still exists. It is on display in the National Coach Museum in Lisbon. If you look at the right side paneling, you can still see where the bullets went in. The monarchy is gone. The carriage survived. The killers won. The crown paid. The Republic named a street after the men who did it. The bullet holes outlasted the throne. If you made it to the end, you already know this channel is different. Subscribe. Share this with one person who's never heard of the Portuguese regicide. And if you want the next one, it's already there.